Welcome back to another Provident webinar. I'm your host, Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education for Provident. I have the pleasure of introducing John Oates, CEO of the International Public Safety Data Institute. I first met John years ago when we were involved at the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation related to the Everyone Goes Home program in its infancy. I've had the fortune to see and talk to John many times since then, and I can say that he's not lost his passion for the health, safety, and welfare of firefighters. I realize discussions about data don't thrill many firefighters or fire service leaders for that matter, and that's unfortunate because data keeps us in the public safety by enabling to make better decisions often before an emergency occurs. I'm sure John will be able to cite some specific examples of this. In a few minutes, I'll have John introduce himself and give you some background on his organization and himself. But before we go there, I need to review a few slides of Provident, the company who's hosting our webinar tonight, and my employer. Provident got its start in 1902 as an independent insurance agency in the Pittsburgh area. In 1928, the leadership at Provident saw a need to offer customized accident and health policy to volunteer fire departments. Today, we provide volunteer combination career firefighters and emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. We also offer special risk and transportation insurance. Provident's been nominated and has won the 5 years as the top insurance employer by the Insurance Business Magazine. So some of our programs quickly, we have an accident and health policy. And if you are an accident and health client, you have access to our first responder assistance program. You and your immediate family members. We also offer a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy that covers the members of your organization, even when you're away from the firehouse and not doing things for the fire department or the ambulance service, a group life policy, critical illness and cancer policy, and of course, now our property and casualty insurance. And if you're a property and casualty client, you have free access to our Fire Plus Academy, which is available to you through Fire Rescue One. Tonight, I have John Oates with me from the International Public Safety Data Institute, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let John take it from there. And in fact, I'm even going to turn my ugly mug off, so all you get to do is see John. Thanks for being with us tonight, John. How about telling our viewers about yourself and your organization?
Sure. Thank you, Ed, and certainly Provident for the opportunity, and Sam for your work behind the scenes to knit this all together, and welcome everybody to a conversation tonight about the different ways that we can use data to help solve our problems and maybe even identify our problems. As Ed mentioned, my name is John Oates. I'm the president and the CEO of the International Public Safety Data Institute, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that was created in 2018 to be the fire services resource for all things data. We have 4 things that we do. We have the FireCARES online community risk assessment platform. We have NFORS Analytics, which is a subscription-based analytical tool that fire departments can connect to in order to have real-time analytics of what they do. That helps feed the exposure tracker app, which is a career diary that allows you to track all your exposures, everything that you do over the course of your time in your career. So if unfortunately you should become a member of the club that nobody wants to belong to, whether it's cardiac cancer, behavioral health, you have that right in the palm of your hand rather than having to sift through a pallet of paper. I'll remind you that the exposure tracker is free. You don't have to be an analytics customer to use it. You could go to the App Store. I don't care if you're an iPhone user or an Android user, you can go to the App Store, download it for free, start entering your exposures today. And then we do a variety of special projects with NIST and NIOSH and CDC and universities and other entities on things related to data. And it's very interesting, and it puts us in a lot of different spaces and a lot of different opportunities to look across the spectrum of the fire service, whether it's career combination, volunteer, wildland, industrial, of how that looks like. Just 2 seconds about me. I'm an incredibly lucky human. I've been involved, as I said, I've been involved with the fire service for a very long period of time. I grew up a cornfield and 2 houses away from the local volunteer fire department. My dad was a volunteer for over 50 years. And as the picture shows, I never got past as a little kid growing up and playing with fire trucks. I was fortunate enough to go to a small liberal arts college in southwestern New Hampshire that had their own fire department. So completely student run. We're responsible for everything from the budget to getting the truck out the door. And that was a great experience. And shortly after I graduated from there with a bachelor's degree in accounting, I decided that being inside of an office every day wasn't the best thing for me. So I ended up getting hired as a career firefighter in a fire department in Central Connecticut. Spent 20 years there, left as a battalion chief in 2008, and had the opportunity to jump the other side of the river to East Hartford, Connecticut, to be their fire chief for 13 years, where I was content. I was phenomenal people, great place to work, great people to work with. We were busy. We had a lot of stuff going on. And I didn't mention before, but the IPSDI was founded really off of a series of fireground experiments. First, the private dwelling experiment, then the high-rise experiment, followed by the EMS experiments, and was really shepherded by Dr. Lori Moore Merrill when she was executive vice president or executive to the general president at the IAFF. And as Dr. Lori got more and more into these sorts of projects, it became evident that they needed to stand on their own. So she retired from the IAFF and stood up the International Public Safety Data Institute. And then in October of 21, my phone rang and it was Dr. Lori. And she's like, look, this thing's going to happen and your phone's probably going to ring. And short time later, she got appointed as U.S. Fire Administrator, which we all should be thankful for because it is transformed that office certainly in a great way. And the board of directors of IPSDI asked if I would like to follow in her shoes. So since then, I've been doing my best to shepherd IPSDI forward from both the analytics and FireCARES and things related to data. As Ed said, I've been involved in a bunch of things through the foundation and a variety of other things, Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and a variety of other things that has left me in a unique position that I benefited from a ton of people over the course of my fire service career that have made me better than I would have been if not for those interactions. So from Chief Mann's time as commissioner in the state of Pennsylvania to my time teaching at the Connecticut Fire Academy and all over the place, I owe a lot. So the opportunity to give a little bit back tonight is certainly in that vein. So we're going to talk about a handful of things related to decision making and decision determination, because part of a lot of what fire service leaders do, and that's small L leader, that doesn't mean chief of department, that means people that are responsible for leading organizations forward. A large part of what you do is make decisions, but how we make those decisions, how we base those decisions, how we form those decisions is really, really important. I was doing a class at a fire academy one time, and a very young firefighter, it was at chief's panel, a very young firefighter asked, how do you make decisions? And I'm like, I just grab a dart and throw it at the dartboard, and wherever it lands, that's what we do. And he kind of looked at me and I'm like, no, it's not quite that simple, but there's times when it feels like that. And I think we've all seen decisions by fire service organizations that cause us to kind of tilt your head like your dog does and go like, why'd they do it that way? And maybe they had a reason for it, but is it the same way that you would do things in your organization? So it can't be random. It can't be by chance. It can't be just wherever the roulette ball landed or wherever what space the dart landed in. It has to be very intentional, because the expectation of our communities is significantly more than that. So making good and timely decisions is the crux of responsibility in leadership positions. The Marine Corps obviously has a higher criticality oftentimes than what we do in the fire service, but they have a dictum that describes if you're 70% ready and have 70% consensus, then act. Because particularly in their environment, and certainly in the uncertainty of our environment, you're never going to have everything that you need. You're never going to have every piece of information. So if you keep waiting to get to 80%, to 90%, God forbid 100%, you're never going to be able to make a decision. So when you start to get down the path of trying to figure out the problem, the solution, the decision, when you get close, that's probably a good time to pull the pin. If nothing else, if you make the wrong decision, you will find out really quickly that you did, and you can reverse and go in the other direction. We'll talk about some of the challenges that as we go along. I should have mentioned up front, we're going to have a little bit of time for questions towards the end. So if you want to jot them down, throw them in the chat. Sam's going to monitor them, and we'll leave you enough time at the end of the evening to spend some time with that. As we make decisions, and I don't care what type of decision they make and how they relate to your fire emergency service organization, the focus is on mission always. If we have to provide an order to it, it's mission, team, and self. And as a good leader that's doing it right, you will never, ever, ever, ever get to yourself as a consideration in the context of the decision. So from a boss perspective, from a leader perspective, as we make decisions, we always, always, always focus on the mission, because that's why we're there. All the rest of the junk is secondary. It's not about, am I going to get reelected? Are people going to like this? Is it going to play well at the kitchen table? None of that stuff matters. It matters about what decisions that we make that enable the mission of the organization. So before we get too far into that, I want to talk about some terms that we often hear, often use, and may or may not get used the right way. We hear oftentimes that we are a data-driven fire department. I'm like, well, that's nice, but you're probably not, nor do you want to be. Because if we say we're data-driven, it means exactly that. We are data-driven. Data decisions based on data. Absolutely no questions asked. Whatever the data says is what we're going to do. Those decisions often lack common sense. Even if you have common sense, you don't use it. So the decisions are based only on the data that you have captured. And depending on your system and depending on what's going on, some of these things may be hard to capture data with. So I would ask you to refrain from saying you're specifically data-driven. I would ask you to contemplate the term data-informed, which adds context to data creation and capture. You have common sense, you use it. You look at the data in the context of the decision you have to make, and you see it in the context of all the data that you've ever seen in the past. So you have domain knowledge. You've been in the fire service for a while for a reason. So as you start to make those decisions, the data is going to help inform and add context to all the stuff that you've ever done in the course of your fire service career. You think critically whether the current data or behavior can be extrapolated to the future or not. You look at that. And it's not to say that, well, we're going to twist the data to make it fit what we need, or we're just going to ignore this part of the data. No, that's not what it says. We're matching the data and the information that we have with our experience. And there's times, and we've seen it, and particularly for people that have been in the fire service for a while, we've seen that data today paints a completely different picture than data yesterday. All you have to do is look at the video in the program that ULFSRI put out about how fast fire burns, and that we're down to 3 minutes to get out of safely evacuate a building that's on fire. If you're a civilian and you have a fire in your home, you got 3 minutes. Well, 3 minutes before used to be, just part of the problem. We used to, how many, 15 minutes till flashover and all those other things that were maybe relative or realistic back in the day. But now in the built environment, in a 2023 built environment, it's different. So with data informed, data interpretation follows data capture. We have data, we interpret, we apply that data, and the data interpretation precedes decision making. The third part, data inspired, data curious, and we'll talk at the end a little bit about data curiosity, is you have common sense, but you also understand creativity. You build hypotheses, you build narratives looking at data from different sources. You think critically while imagining the possibilities. You go, okay, the data says this, but what does it mean if we change a couple factors, if we move the needle, if we add resources, we take away resources, that we look at things from a creative perspective to understand more about what it is. And we're going to talk a little bit about data storytelling and data curiosity here in a little bit. So when you hear people say data driven, just kind of think about that for a little bit. And if you have a choice to make, I urge you to not only capture every bit of data and information that you can find, but also use your experience, also use your common sense to help enrich that data with context to help understand what that means in your community, in your fire service organization. There's a lot of different ways to make decisions. There's too many choices, too little direction. And it's one of the things that we don't train people well. There's not a lot, even from a fireground decision-making perspective, there's just not a lot of really good teaching training programs out there. So part of it is understanding is how do we decide how to decide? Do you know when you're looking at what success looks like? And can you predict the range of possible outcomes? Because those are things that are important. Deciding how to decide is an article that was written by those three authors, Courtney Lavallo and Clark, that was published in the Harvard Business Review in 2014. It's a good read if you've got a couple seconds. And we're gonna make the PowerPoint available for you at the end of the night. So don't flip out if I make a reference to something you didn't capture it. But deciding how to decide is important, because we think we just do it automatically, but actually our brain is trained in certain ways depending on how your brain is organized and what your experience is, that we use different methods to decide. And part of that is understanding on the front end is, what does success look like? What does a good decision look like? What does a good outcome look like? What are we trying to do? And that can vary greatly. Sometimes we pick the first worst choice, because all of our choices are bad, and we're going to take the least worst of those and hopefully have a decent outcome. So understanding what that looks like. Often I think, we get wrapped up with data informed decision making. I think before we ever get to that point, we need to think about data informed problem statements. And that goes back to the title of the session tonight, is what's your problem? And I say that because it's that falls under so many different contexts. It could be a budget problem, it could be a people problem. That's the company officer, the adult child, like, what's your problem? But that's part of the way to look at it is what is our problem? Do we have a strong definition of what is actually the problem? Or do we have to peel back some layers and look at it to really get to the crux of what is the actual problem, rather than what the perceived problem is? It's hard to know what you're solving if you haven't clearly defined the problem. And it's important to know, particularly for chief fire officers and people that deal with whatever your form of budget governance is. I don't care if it's a fire board, board of public safety, city manager, board of selectmen, finance, whatever your governance is. You cannot walk in there and go, I think, I feel, I believe, when answering questions about how your fire department operates. It wasn't really acceptable. We could have pulled that off, sometime in the 80s and 90s, because there was less, there was less scrutiny, less interest. Everybody viewed the fire chief as the local fire expert. Well, as well as I do that ship has sailed. So we need to be able to go in there as chief fire officers and fire service leaders and go, we know, we've seen, the data indicates, it is our experience that blank, that all of those responses and all of those things are couched in data, are based in things that are repeatable, that we can print out on a piece of paper and show to them that this is how that thought process goes. So let's think about data informed problem statements. And part of that is understanding what type of problem do you have. Is it a technical problem or an adaptive problem? And one of the greatest failures, organizational and leadership failures, is when we treat an adaptive challenge like a technical problem. And I'll explain to you why that is in a minute, but it happens all the time. And I will put it in a very, very simple nutshell. The fire service has an incredibly bad history of trying to either invent or buy things to fix people problems. Things are a technical solution. Changing attitudes, hearts, minds, and behaviors are adaptive solutions. So if we try to jam what is essentially an adaptive problem with a technical solution, it is going to fail. So a little bit more about that. What is a technical problem? Technical problems are easy to identify. They also often lend themselves to quick and easy solutions. They can often be solved by an authority, an expert, somebody that's been around a long time. They require change in really just one or two few places. People are generally receptive to technical solutions, and solutions can often by order or policy, because these are coming from the known. Most technical solutions or solutions to technical problems are things where the knowledge exists to solve that problem, that it is fairly simple to identify and fairly simple to solve. Adaptive challenges are harder. They're difficult to identify. They're easy to deny. It's like, no, that's not really what the problem is. When we're dealing with adaptive problems, we're talking about requiring changes in values, beliefs, roles, relationships, and often our approach to work. And if you think about that, that is hard. That is incredibly hard for us to do. Is when you start talking about changing organizational values or individual beliefs or what my role is in the organization or my relationship between people or between organizations is incredibly hard. The value in adaptive challenges is the people with the problem do the work of solving it. We are as my friend John Tippett says, the answer's in the room. And that's often the way it is the answer's in the room, but we're gonna have to go about doing it in a way that's different. It requires change in numerous places, usually across organizational boundaries, across topic areas, across people, across places. People are often resist the solution even when they acknowledge the adaptive challenge, because it's like, well, it's not me, it's them, it's those people, it's that individual, it's that company, it's that department. It's hard to ever admit, it's everybody else's mess and not yours. Sometimes those solutions require experiments, and new discoveries often take a long time to implement, because we're talking about the areas of uncharted territory. And we see this today as we talk about and look at how do we as an industry, as the fire service, reduce the incidence of occupational cancer. There are experiments and there are things going on, and from a research and development perspective today that we won't see the results for years, but are designed to address what is an adaptive challenge. The same with some of the behavioral health challenges is how do we answer the behavioral health challenge in the fire and emergency services? How do we do that in a way that works across all generations, all roles, functions, genders, size, shape, color, all of those things, and do it in a way that allows us to still continue to provide good service. So adaptive, understand the difference between technical and adaptive, because otherwise you will find yourself challenged and aggravated. So what types of data do we need for problem definition? If it's an adaptive problem, what is the root cause of the problem? And this is something that often challenges people, and did me, for a time too, as a fire chief, is somebody who come in and complain about something or make a comment about something. And it's like, okay, what else? There's more there than what you're telling me. And we have to get down to the root cause of the problem. And sometimes that takes a while, talking to more than one person, doing more than just a cursory inspection. And often for adaptive problems, it's driving an emotional reaction. So what is driving that emotional reaction? And we see that oftentimes in the fire service for closely held beliefs and things that are important to us. And we talk about changing those, it flips people out. And it's like, well, why the reaction? And the reaction is often tied to maybe to culture, to maybe to history, to fear of change and things like that. And part of that is important. Why hasn't it been addressed before? Because often these are things that members of the organization go, yeah, it's been like that for a long time. And that's admitting that it's either been broken or been wrong for a long time, but we've never wanted to fix it because it's hard. So it's why is it? And it's, oftentimes it's like, well, nobody wanted to take it on. Somebody with strength and power in the organization was resistive. The excuse we don't have any money often comes up and stuff like that. So, finding out those three things: root cause, what's driving the emotional reaction, and why hasn't it been addressed before, can help you down the pathway to a better definition of what that problem is. And then the last part is how does the culture of your organization, community, and team speak to the issues surrounding the problems? What are the things that are important to the department, to the community, to the fire station relative to this issue? And how can those things, and that's not a negative. Those are some of the things that can help enable solutions if we have strong positive organizational culture that has room for flexibility and change, and understand that while at the time we honor the history of the organization, the people that came before us, we recognize the need for adaptation into today's environment. Once we've defined our problem, we have to start creating in our brain or on a piece of paper to start sketching out what our solutions are. The process for decision making on the scenes of emergencies versus programmatic or people problems are vastly different. Both are impactful. Both need a certain level of timeliness, but the context of timely changes. On the fire ground, our timeliness is pretty short window, that we need to make decisions promptly, because on the fire ground, the longer you take to make decisions, the less options that you have, the less likely that your number one option is still valid. If you stand there with your brain wrapped up in the middle of the street, paralyzed and not able to make a decision, well, then you have less options. So timeliness on the fire ground is really important. Timeliness and decision making for people related challenges, organizational related challenges, some of these big deal things is a little bit different. You can buy yourself some time, even for some big deal people related problems. There may be a need to immediately act, but that is such a tiny little bit of the problems that we have. The phrase, I hear you, I understand you, give me some time to work on the problem, and then do that is really, really valuable from a boss perspective. Now, that's not a free pass to ignore it. And in that process, continue, give the person some feedback. Go like, look, I'm working on it, doing some research, trying to figure out the best problem, need to engage some people, whatever that looks like. And not just, make sure that you inform that you're not blowing them off. You're not telling them to go like, I'll get to you. And I have been accused on at a time or two, taking too long to make some really important decisions. But I find that contemplation is helpful because it allows you time to explore all the options and saves you from doing something rash or stupid that you may regret later. Now, oftentimes was the decision that I made the first one that came to mind? Yeah, absolutely. But that's based on context, right? That's based on 30 plus years of fire service experience that I've seen a few things that most of this stuff pops up. You're like, yeah, I think I know how this ends. But that would be incredibly arrogant of me or anybody else to go like, yeah, I know the answer to every problem. So you need to run the system, run the process to help define your problem and start down the path of solving your problems. So on the fire ground, we've got a lot of different things to choose from, to help shape our decision making on the fire ground. And that's not the purpose tonight. So I'm just going to touch it real quick. But you look at this book that I have in the picture, Lloyd Lehman's original fire tactics book from 1953, still applicable today. That very, very current and relevant. If you take some of the historical pieces out of it, there's still a lot in there that looks at facts, probabilities in your own situation to help drive decisions on the fire ground. John Boyd, the author of the OODA Loop, was a military commander. If you haven't looked at any of his work, it's absolutely fascinating and immediately generalizable to the fire ground. And you observe, orient, decide, and then act, and then go back to observe to continue in that loop to look at whether that works or not. And then the Godfather John Norman's book that as a mnemonic talked about Cola's wealth is a primer for fireground decision making. So whatever tools you use, make sure you use them. Get your brain trained to be repeatable on the fireground. Use make notes, tactical worksheet, command aid, whatever that looks like as you're standing there making decisions. Quiet space where you can do that. And make sure that you keep track of it and get used to that routinized, I'm going to get in this incident flow or this battle rhythm and do it the same way all the time. Find a way that works, that addresses all fireground priorities, takes care of the people, solves the incident problem, and continue to hone that and work that solution. For people and programs, it's a little bit more complicated. And I just wheeled out this case because I think it's interesting and gives us an opportunity to look in a bunch of different areas. So there was an article that was talking from a risk management perspective. Orange County, California, had a 71% reduction in stretcher related injuries over this fiscal year since they first purchased and initiated the Stryker power load system, which is a mechanically assisted stretcher in and out of the ambulance. If you haven't seen one, it's pretty magical. It saves backs and saves injuries. So the question is, how did they get to that number, and how did they do that, and how did they come up with that solution? So what sorts of data do we need to look at to make a decision like that? So you start with, all right, how many ambulance calls are we doing per year that involve an ambulance, a stretcher, and movement of a patient? So it's not just enough to go like, how many ambulance calls do we have, but how many ambulance calls do we have that we transported a patient and had to move them to the stretcher and had to lift and move them? How many injury reports related to stretchers have we had? Not injury reports just for on EMS calls, because that's a wide, we talk about we're collecting data and we're finding information that helps enable our decision. So if we just take injury reports related to EMS calls, we're gonna have a bunch of noise in there that has nothing to do with this problem. But if we go like, all right, what's our year over year injury reports related to stretchers and patient movement? Now we have something that's valuable. And they go, okay, what types of mitigation did we have in engineering? Obviously, engineering solution was the stretchers. Did we have a policy mitigation where we talked about how people lift and move? Did we train people in proper lifting and moving, and did all those things, but yet still didn't have the solution? And then what were the costs? What were the costs of the mitigation, both direct and indirect? Direct is, how much did it cost to buy stretchers and install the mounts in the rig if we had to, and buy batteries and train people and maintenance, all that stuff. And then the indirect costs of perhaps an injury coming from that stretcher or things like that. So it's not as simple as going, hey, we bought a bunch of power load stretchers and we don't have any injuries anymore, and so they're magical, they're the best thing ever. You really have to look at all of the bits and pieces and understand, are we looking at total injuries, total cost of injuries, total rate of injuries, and all different things that tell different stories in different ways. And if you don't take the time to, at the end of the day, some of it's math, but if you don't take the time to dive into it, it becomes hard to understand exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then how do we know if we're successful? How do we get to that 71%? Well, then, year over year injury reports related to stretchers, lost time year over year, the cost of the intervention, cost of injury prior to intervention, total and per event, and cost of injury post-intervention, both total and per event. Because those are two different things. We could have, and it's important, I don't get it, this is for stretchers, but it could be for any type of injury, on the fire ground, whatever, because occasionally as bosses, fire chiefs, leaders, you're going to be like, well, your workers' comp costs are excessive. Like, all right, well, what's excessive? Well, they're really, really high this year. Okay. Are they high because we've had a ton of injuries, i.e. many small injuries, or are they high because we've had one or two really expensive injuries like a shoulder or a knee or a back that, otherwise you take away 2 or 3 injuries and our costs are way below last year? So it's important to ask those sorts of questions, both before the intervention and after the intervention, to help. Again, that's part of that definition problem. When somebody wheels that out, it's like, okay, there's more to that than just going, okay, I'm sorry, we spent $465,000 on workers' comp related stuff this year. I'll try to be better, and to really look at the primary drivers of all that. How do I know? And this is a problem we run into, because you have access to so much data today, and some of it says fire on it, some of it doesn't. But I mean, it's just a truckload of stuff. So how do I know if I'm looking at the right stuff? And context and problem definition will help. If it doesn't help support or help answer your problem statement or your defined problem, then put it off to the side, park it, and don't worry about it. Don't muddy up your decision-making process to solve your problem with stuff that doesn't matter. COVID, if for nothing else, the pandemic has taught us the value of seeking other data sets to ensure a robust picture. There are things you may look at that have nothing to do with fire. They might be community demographic, they may be financial data, they may be medical data and stuff like that. Fire department created data is only one part of what you should evaluate as you're solving the problems, the wicked problems of your fire department. This is related to data-informed decision-making process, but this is a pretty nice, simple and compact kind of method to do it. As you ask and you formulate a focused question, almost like a hypothesis of what is my problem. You search for the acquired data, search for the best available data, analyze that data, critically apprise and analyze that data. Take a look at it and go like, what does this data mean? Apply, integrate that data with your professional expertise, and be conscious about your mental models. Don't Don't go in there with preconceived notion. Understand, apply that data with what you know to exist and from a historical perspective in your organization in the past. Decide and communicate what your decision is, and then assess and monitor the outcomes. So that's pretty simple, and that's a pretty good way to get to a data-informed decision-making process. That's not my graphic. That came from an article on decision-making, so you feel free to use it with attribution. It's important to not let any of this become paralyzing. Barry Schwartz, a psychologist, and he coined the phrase the paradox of choice to describe his consistent findings that while increased choice allows us to achieve objectively better results, it also leads to greater anxiety, indecision, paralysis, and dissatisfaction. Rather than empowering us to make better choices, our virtually unlimited access to information often leads to a greater fear of making the wrong decision, which in turn leads us to spinning our wheels in seemingly inescapable purgatory of analysis paralysis, all the while getting nowhere on our important projects. So both of those are, go all the way back to what the Marine Corps said. When you get to 70%, go. So at some point, we could just keep adding things and keep doing an analysis and keep looking. At some point, you're like, all right, we got an area or area of focus. We got a place to go. We're going to make a decision. Do not let perfect be the enemy of good. And one of the leaders in the community I work for would say this. He's a very, very strong political leader, held elected office. And he's right often. And I'm not saying we don't strive to be perfect, but don't wait for 100% before you make a decision. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. There are some things that we do that we're just going to get to good on a normal day. We're going to get to good. We'll still strive for perfect, but don't let perfect get in the way. Data and the information gleaned from it inform, educate, and drive decisions. It can explain both sides of nearly everything we deal with today. If you're not using data to help drive and inform your decisions, inform your constituents, explain everything and anything to your boss, you're missing a critical opportunity to improve your fire department emergency service. We can't just wing it anymore. And I get it. It makes things more complicated. But what this also helps is this helps your decision-making across your organization become teachable, which means those of us with a couple gray hairs, those of us that have tenure with the organization, have the ability now to pass on that decision-making process to the people that are coming after us. So when they land in that seat as a station captain, as a director of training, as a chief of department, as assistant chief of operations, whatever that role is as they move up the ladder in your organization, they are better prepared because you have a methodology that you use to solve problems and to figure out solutions. And some of that comes from, and I mentioned this on the outside, it is data curiosity is important. The thing that happens though is curiosity is scary to people who aren't. You have people, I'm sure you know people that drive to work the exact same way, eat the same thing for lunch every single day, put the same thing in their coffee, stir their coffee in the same direction, watch the same TV show at the same time of day every single day. Those people that lack curiosity. So those people get really, really uncomfortable with particularly with a younger generation of adults. Young adults say that are prone to do what? Ask why. Well, why do we do it that way? Why is this? Why is this? And we get pissed off at them because it's like, why are you asking these questions? Well, they want to learn. Holy crap, why don't we teach them? Let's answer that question. Let them be curious, because if they become curious, they know more, they become better and more engaged. So get comfortable being uncomfortable. There's nothing about leadership in the fire service that should be comfortable. It's not like an old pair of slippers that you put on and go, oh, this is the best thing ever. No, you should be uncomfortable. You should be comfortable being uncomfortable. A lot of organizations don't embrace curiosity. In this recent state of curiosity survey that's conducted by the Harris polling people, only 39% of employees say their managers are extremely encouraging or very encouraging of curiosity. That's sad. As bosses, that's one thing that we should do is encourage curiosity, particularly as we increase the diversity and type of person that comes through our door that wants to be a member of our organization. They're coming from other walks of life. They're coming from other communities, other places. We should embrace that and go like, awesome. Let's leverage the things that you know that we don't, that you've learned that we haven't, in order to be better. So curiosity is incredibly important. The problem is that the second to last one from the bottom, 60% say their workplace creates barriers to curiosity into their work. And how often do we do that? How often do we utter the, well, that's not going to work here, or that's that department, that's never going to happen here, or they can only do that because they have money, or whatever, all the other silly little excuses that we come up with for not doing something, when often all we need is a little bit of curiosity to walk down that path to go like, all right, we can get it better. So what curious means and what curious does. And in the course of your work and doing the research relative to problem definition and problem solving, you may stumble across various patterns, phenomena, and anomalies that are unearthed during your data sleuthing. As you're pulling apart data sets and combining stuff together, you might find something that causes you to go, huh, that's interesting. That gives you the opportunity to try to figure out what that's interesting means. Provides the opportunity to start tinkering. But if you start doing that and there's no there, then stop. Metaphorically, if you're in your Halloween costume and everybody else got candy and you got a rock, well, then don't go to that house anymore. If you're going down that pathway and you don't find anything, and you get a rock, all right, stop and go spend your time on something else. But that doesn't mean, the things that we learn in that pursuit are still valuable. So take the time to be curious, to dive into other areas, to find out the why behind the what. Because oftentimes we just get comfortable with like, all right, that's what I'm looking for, without fully understanding the why behind the what. Enablers of curiosity, particularly enablers of curiosity in the fire service, is a organizational culture support a steady process of learning and experimentation. That means all of us must have a common value for things like learning by doing, being comfortable with ambiguity, balancing long and short-term returns. Those values need to be shared across the entire organization, as they can't survive in isolation. Organizational comfort or permission with experimentation is equally necessary. And every department I've ever been with included, do not do that well. Just think about the organizational, next slide. We'll get to that in a minute. We are not often comfortable with ambiguity. What we want is black or white. What we often get is gray. I would submit to you as bosses that you need to be comfortable operating in the gray. And sometimes that gray is so gray, it's almost white. Because there are very, very few absolutes. Matter of fact, there's three. Fire's hot, water's wet, gravity works. Usually I say fire trucks are red, but people get offended by that, particularly in places that don't have red fire trucks. But really, those are the only absolutes. Everything else is up for discussion. So let's get comfortable operating in the gray, and let's get comfortable with the ambiguity. Let's create an organizational permission for experimentation. What is your department's process to start a new program, launch a new idea, or try something different? What is your organization's tolerance or permissibility when that something new doesn't work out? The late Tom Brennan, you may remember him as the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering Magazine, FDNY legend, was fire chief in Waterbury, Connecticut for an extended period of time. And I was fortunate enough to learn from him as a student. And he created for Waterbury Fire an innovation SOP that talked about how an idea went from the kitchen table to department doctrine, and all the steps along the way, from testing and evaluation and approval and negotiation, all those things that provided his members the ability to take something literally from the kitchen table in the fire station to be an organizational policy. And I think it's important for all of us to do that. But what we run into is our organizational permissibility for failure is not that spectacular. Think about this. A brand new firefighter, probationary firefighter, haven't been there very long, screws something up. Are we, genuinely speaking, surprised? Probably not. What's the fix? Retrain them, coach them up, pat them on the head, send them on their way. They probably aren't going to screw that up again. Same with an apparatus operator. Takes a wrong turn, pumps at the wrong pressure, doesn't get a good apparatus spot. Little things that apparatus operators do that occasionally trip them up. Again, retrain them, remind them of the policy, remind them about their vehicle, the things that they're doing, the things they need to do, their job responsibilities, set them on their way. It's fine. But when you become a company officer, lieutenant, captain, battalion chief, chief of department, that organizational permissibility for being wrong gradually diminishes. And I'm sure in your organization, like all the ones that I've ever been in, have policies that are legendary because somebody screwed something up. And that somebody may have been a boss. because whether we like it or not, and it's incredibly unfair that we treat people like this, but we don't let fire chiefs be wrong. Like, think about in your organization, if the fire chief is wrong, and I mean wrong with a capital W, like screw something up, everybody's like aghast and like, oh my God, the fire chief isn't perfect. Well, no shit. Fire chief's a human. So when we look at things like that, and I'm not saying that you have a free pass to be an idiot and be wrong every single day, but what I am saying is experimentation helps us get better. And we need to be able to create a system that says, look, we don't have all the knowledge we need. We don't have all the experience we need. We don't have all the information we need. So we're going to try some things out to solve some problems to make sure that what we come up with is the right thing for our organization. And you see this, and I'm not asking you to do this research, but you see this going on today relative to fires and stored energy systems, lithium-ion batteries, cars, power walls, tools, e-mobility devices, all of the things that are powered by stored energy system. The fire service is doing massive experimentation to find out what to do and what not to do. And they've started to find some things what not to do, but we haven't really coalesced much around what to do. So create a culture of experimentation. Create a culture of, we're going to try some things to see if they make our organization better, and whatever that is in your need, in your organization. So the last part, I'm going to talk about a little bit about storytelling. So it's really, really hard for a dashboard or a memo or a picture to explain why something is happening. How many times have you looked at a dashboard on a computer screen, maybe hanging in the apparatus bay, maybe on somebody's desk, and go, well, that's pretty, but like, so what? Like, who cares? I know that sounds really weird from the coming from the guy that owns a data analytics platform that's portrayed in dashboards, but you look at a lot of things today, and we want our dashboards to be built like really solid and really robust and have a ton of information that helps us make smart choices. But unfortunately, a lot of them are like what's shown in the picture, which is a Hollywood movie set. It might look cool in the front, but there's absolutely nothing behind them. And some of them are absolutely more cluttered than they need to be. And that's, yes, those are two different kinds of dashboards. One's in an airplane, one's on a computer screen. But how do we extract information? If that's your dashboard for your fire department, either one of them, no member from the public is going to be able to sort through that and figure that out and understand what that says and understand what that means. I don't care how well-intentioned you are. It's just not going to happen. So how do we do that? Well, part of that is data storytelling. Out of all the endless charts, dashboards, and visualizations fall flat with their intended audience, because oftentimes there's just too much there, and then packaged up in a way that people can't understand it. So how do we fix that? And it comes from data storytelling. And storytelling is massive in the fire service. It's how we pass along virtually everything from what happened on the shift before to organizational history and culture, to how we pass on tidbits from the senior member to others. Data tale must be like any other story, beginning, a middle, and an end, presented without bias and with proper empathy and context. Users must be able to absorb and leverage the insights with more intelligent decision making. Proficiency with data storytelling means being able to present information without injecting bias and recognize what's important and what's not, with keeping things simple. Because if you look at it, like, there's nothing simple about any part of that. That's complicated. That's complicated even for the people that understand it. We want to make it simple, to avoid the intent, and also be effective. And that's, you avoid the tendency to adjust the data to fit presenting storylines and making sure to frame the data in a story that the audience cares about. The skill of data storytelling is removing the noise and focusing people's attention on key insights. So if you're doing a proposal for replacing a piece of fire apparatus, adding paid staff, a recruitment drive, maybe replacing a building, or we want to buy an extractor so we can clean our turnout gear, or have diesel exhaust extraction system in the fire service. Focusing people's attention on the key insights. And when we talk about washing dirty gear, that's not how many revolutions per minute the gear washer turns or how many pounds of gear you can put in there. The key insight is, we want clean turnout gear so our members don't get sick. Or we want to replace turnout gear because the stuff we're wearing is 40 years old and fire burns hotter than it did back then. So what those key insights are, the things that are important. I often say, and I came to the conclusion very early in my career as a fire chief, that I had 3 bullet points to get a point across to the mayor. And this is very much data storytelling. Yes, I often, 30 pages of research, well-written document, all the research, all the backup, all the data was there. But that tight executive summary that told the story with key insights, with frames that the audience cared about, which the audience was the mayor, was the way to get that message across. I could have charts and graphs and all kinds of stuff, but if I couldn't get it across in 3 bullet points, never going to happen. So you need to use the data to tell your story, but somebody still needs to tell the story. So let's not get hooked on just charts and graphs and fancy shit. At some point, you need a human. That human is you, at whatever level of your organization. That human needs to be you to tell the story relative to what's going on in your organization in relative to data. As our operating environment continues to change, the need for data-informed, data-driven information will only increase. Natural disasters, COVID, social unrest, social justice, service delivery demands, legislation, labor management, volunteer recruitment, retention are all areas where data must be injected into the conversation. You're not going to solve any of those, nor any of even your small problems in your fire department without an application of data to help help hone the question and help inform the solution. So I'll end with this. It's hard. And I 100%, you are absolutely 100%, because I'm sure a lot of you are like, holy crap, this is a lot. You're right, it is. It's hard, but it's even harder if you don't do it, because you get yourself into a box where you're going to get jammed up because you don't know. You're going to make a wrong decision because you didn't look at the data the right way, or you just wheeled out some solution that you thought, or you phoned a friend and that's what you got, buddy, 3 counties over. It's not going to work that way. The people that rely on our service, the family that lives on the corner of walk and don't walk, wants the best of you, and the best of you comes from making those data informed decisions as we help solve what's your problem today. So with that, I will quit. I will come off of share screen and see if anybody's got any questions.
Well, John, no questions popped up yet, but I want to throw something out, and maybe this will open some questions up. So let's say a fire department has recently consolidated with another fire station. And the question comes up, okay, we have 2 buildings. Now we need to be in 1 building somewhere. And the fire department feels that they have the talent to be able to pull a study together and come up with an action plan. But it's a volunteer organization. They just simply don't have the time. And even in a career department, you may not have the time. How can your organization help with that?
So we have done that for other people. So there's a place to start. And then the first place to start is FireCARES, which is an online community risk assessment platform that we built for the fire service. It has all of your data, every fire department's data in it from 2002 to 2021. That's the most recent data set that we have available. You can go in there, you can look at your activity, you can look at heat maps of where your action is, you can look at what's gone on historically in your community. If you've merged with another fire department, you can send us a message and go like, hey, we ABC fire department merged with DEF fire department, can we redraw the boundaries and mash it together and help decide, start looking at where's development happened, where has the community grown, what does the road look like, where's our calls for service, where's our people, and start making those decisions. So FireCARES is free. If you're an IFC member, you've got your IFC membership login will get you into FireCARES. If you're not, if you go to the FireCARES website and hit the help button, put in a ticket, we'll help you reset your sign-in password. And then after that, there's different groups, and us included, that can help you calculate effective response force. How long, because we get wrapped up with, I think Ed and you and I talked about this, we get wrapped up with response time is the end all be all, and that's fine, but all that does is stop the clock. What the important thing is, what do we do once we got there? So how long does it take to get the necessary apparatus and people, the full first alarm assignment or whatever it takes to mitigate your emergency in your community? How long does it take to get all of them there and actually make a difference on the problem? So it's hard. Like, fire station location decisions are incredibly hard because it's something that we live with for I mean, heck, I worked out of a fire station that had horses in it at one point in time. So I mean, it's something we certainly live in for 100 years or so.
So, John, we do have a question. It's from Michael. Can you give some broad examples of resources that are available to help organizations get access to good data? And it says John just gave some. I mean, so like if you're using some report management system, whether it be Firehouse or ESO or whoever it is, that's one place to start. Information from the CAD systems.
Yep. You know, look at, you know, all of your, I shouldn't say all, most communities have access to your property layer. Like, where are the buildings? What are the buildings? What is the value? There's a website called City Data, city-data.com, I think, that is a collection of data sets relative to most communities in the country. Great place to start. Your regional council of governments, you know, to look at. One of the things that we use in NFORS analytics that is really, really critical to decision making is census data, including the social vulnerability index, to allow us to look at not only where are our people, where are the people that we solve, what are the attributes of the people that we service, to help us better understand how to do community risk reduction interventions to meet the needs of those populations. So there's a ton of, Google created a phenomenal data set of people mobility during the pandemic that they just recently turned off. That was great because it saw where people went. And you saw during the pandemic, people stopped going to bars, restaurants, recreational facilities, stuff like that. And you saw an increase in people movement into parks, solitary recreation, stuff like that. And then, you know, you saw it come out of the inner core of the cities when people weren't going to work anymore, but more people work from home. So it's just, think about that when you're thinking about your problem definition. What data do I need to help flesh out this problem and help drive my solutions, and then start hunting for those data sets? There's a ton, literal ton of publicly available data, because if it's in the data in the public sphere, you should be able to get it for free. So
Michael, another suggestion is on top of what John's already given you, a good place I know locally. I went to our county planning office, and of course the GIS mapping people are part of the planning office, and that's what they do for a living, is planning. And if you can't find data yourself, if you go talk to them and say, hey, this is the problem I have, where can I get my fingers on some data to help me solve this problem? Your county planning office can turn you on to a lot of things. I got involved with a subcommittee with the volunteer combination officer section. They're getting ready to issue another ribbon report on data. And so part of my task was to come up with sources of data. So I just started doing research. I mean, I discovered a website in Pennsylvania that the state police have available that I could go look at vehicle accidents, and it broke them down by county, by highway, by municipality, and not only vehicle accidents, but anything that they've investigated in a way of crime. I could look at, you know, how many rapes they investigated, how many murders they investigated. And I just stumbled across it by fooling around on the internet. So a good place is Google to do a search. Another place is the county planning office. And ultimately, if you pull it all together and you don't know what to do with it, organizations like John's is available to help you decipher it and put it into a plan. Right, John?
Yeah, and we spent a fair bit of time with that sense making and with a variety of people. And you hit on something that's important, that we get, I'll say we get spoiled. I grew up in the Northeast, spent some time, most of my life in the Northeast, and a lot of government entities and a lot of data is connected by, I can just, tap into to town hall and look at the property layer, look at my tax bill, look at all those things. Well, my dad grew up in a small town in Northeast Arkansas, and they don't have that available. If I want to know something, I have to call Mabel at the courthouse to go, hey, can you go pull a file, copy it, and send it to me in an envelope with a stamp on it? And there's just across the country, since there's probably people from all over the place watching, that know who holds the keys to the castle, so to speak, and become friendly with them and go, hey, can I look at that? And because it's all there. It's just a matter of finding it in a way that makes sense. And again, you get stumped, shoot me an email. We'll try to help point you in the right direction.
Yeah, Michael, if you could give me a thumbs up and let us know whether or not we pounded that question enough for you, gave you what you were looking for. Okay, got a comment. First off, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate taking the time to education on the efficacy of data analytics in the fire service. I'm not sure, and I'm asking this correctly, but is there a statistic gathering on this app of fire EMS suicides for job retention in these fields and public safety? Thank you again for your time.
So there's a lot of work. I'll take the easy one first. There's been a lot of work on recruitment and retention, both career volunteer and certainly in the wildland sphere today. And it's getting better, rather than just knowing that we've kept this many people, we've lost this many people. Our recruitment looks interesting. There's some people doing some very interesting work to better understand why people stay, why people leave, why people decide that this is what they want to do, particularly in the volunteer and combination sphere, where they're not doing it as their vocation, they're doing it as their avocation. So there's work underway there. The suicide piece is incredibly hard. Part of some of the ongoing research is relative to better definition and better understanding, because the problem with firefighter suicide is tied somewhat to stigmatization that we don't, the euphemism that I've heard see more than once is firefighter X died at home. Well, that's a code word for possibly they committed suicide, which is unfortunate that we should be able to say it and remember that person that way, because that spurs activity, and understand that. So it's hard, and particularly it's hard in the volunteer and combination sphere, because if you're a volunteer firefighter and you die, or whether by suicide or any other means, on your death certificate, it's not going to say John Smith firefighter. It's going to say John Smith farmer, John Smith hardware store owner, John Smith insurance salesman, John Smith whatever. It may not, or may say and volunteer firefighter. So that data is not as readily available as possible. So both things that are part of the U.S. Fire Administrator's national strategy, national fire strategy, both behavioral health and recruitment and retention. So they're going to get better, but they are certainly, massive works in progress today. So John, I hope that gets you close to an answer.
John, the other thing is, and I think sometimes I don't think the fire service really knows it, and as far as that matter, even EMS, the amount of work that's being done by the scientific and the medical community on behalf of the fire service absolutely blows me away anymore. It's like every time I go to a national conference, I find out about another study that either the scientific community or the technical community has taken on to help us better understand all the things we talked about tonight, whether it be recruiting, retention, suicide. I've had the opportunity, and John, I think you and I were together in Memphis, the mental health thing that the First Responder Center for Excellence is doing, and the work that they're doing with the doc from Missouri. I mean, every time I turn around, there's another national organization, scientifically or medically, that's doing something on our behalf. And
so I would, and you're 100% right. And I would urge, if people have an interest in that and want to learn more in a digestible form that matches, that's helpful for the fire services, Dr. Sarah Janke from the Center for Fire Health Research created a group called the Science Alliance, and their goal is to take that science and make it digestible for the fire service. So if you go to Science Alliance, I think it's sciencealliance.org or .net, a lot of fire service research there, a lot of short videos that talk about from researchers talking about the projects that they've done, and sign up for their monthly newsletter that'll get you an email that has the cutting edge stuff. I mean, we are fortunate from a fire service perspective that there are some incredibly talented people doing research on our behalf to make things better for today and tomorrow's generation of the American Fire Service.
I
So
mean,
take a look at the Science Alliance.
I think Sarah and them even do a monthly webinar called Nerd Talk.
Nerd Stock.
Yeah, and they take the science and they break it down into terms that make it easy for us that aren't scientists to understand. So I don't see that we have any other questions or comments, and I don't want to drag this on forever. The bottom line is that when Sam sends out the information to you about tonight's webinar, we'll put as many links in there as we can. You'll have a link to John's website. John, if you're okay, we'll put your email address in those links as well.
Sure.
Okay. And obviously tonight's presentation will be uploaded to the Provident YouTube page, so you can look at it later down the road. John, I want to thank you for a very informative presentation tonight. I mean, every time I do one of these, I learn something new. You know, I was in the military, I wasn't in the Marine Corps, but I like that Marine Corps dictum that you come up with tonight, or that you stole from the Marines. So, you know, I just hope those that did listen tonight will pay more attention to data and understand how it's being used nationally, and more importantly, how it can help you better manage your departments and the risk in your own communities. As I said earlier, we'll be uploading this to the Provident YouTube page tonight. There'll be a short 5-question survey at the end of the program. Please take the time to complete it. It helps us better understand how well we did tonight. It also helps us come up with topics for other programs. If you have any questions or need additional resources from today, or you have any idea for a future webinar, please email us at info@providentins.com. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. This wraps up another Provident webinar. Please join us on Thursday, June the 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we'll host a webinar with Chris Paff, who's becoming our hazmat expert, to discuss lithium-ion batteries and your readiness to respond to incidents involving this technology. Until then, stay safe for your family's sakes, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, everybody.